in February of 1983, not one device had been built. We'll get to this very soon. So I asked them, how's your patent status? Well, we realize that once we patent it, we've given the secret away, so we plan on using the strategy of continuance in part, if you know what this means. In other words, they would continue to modify the patent as long as possible with continuations, amendments, so as not to get a patent. That meant that they had no patent. Well, what is the status of your prototype? Well, we are yama, yama, yama. Well, are you going to sell these devices? We don't know. We think we're going to lease them. Well, how much? Well, we'll put a price tag of about $50,000 on each box, and the doctor will be on the franchise agreement. I have a copy of this in case anyone doubts it. Required to charge the person $8,000 if he has no insurance for 10 days use of the box, $10,000 if he has insurance coverage. I have the letter here that went to the franchisees. And yet they had no boxes. A number of people had bought territory for this, including William Parker of the Parker Holistic Health Center and a number of other people that by this time I had met. They had been promised delivery of the brain tuners by December of 1981. And here we are into 1983, and not one box had ever been delivered. Some strange things were happening here. And after listening to this for about an hour, I was prepared. I'd armed a briefcase. I had devices which I had acquired, had smuggled into the United States from the USSR, from Finland, from Germany, from England. I still have some of these. We have the original devices. I brought several of them tonight that have been used by Dr. Wen in Hong Kong. In other words, the grandfather of the Shackman instrument device that Meg had used at the Pharmacon clinics in England. So it turned out that the investors who were at this table were not even aware that this technology was over 100 years old, had been used in the Soviet Union for over 20 years, had been used on the continent for 15, and in Great Britain for 10. They thought that they had an original idea which might have been patentable, etc. These devices could absolutely rock the boat of the pharmaceutical drug industry, the liquor industry, the tobacco industry, the doctors who make a great deal of money. When you want the prescription refilled, usually you have to pay the doctor a fee. It's just a mess. Why are these not being used, for example, in alcoholic rehabilitation centers? I'll digress with another storyline, and all of this will converge in a moment. In 1969, some more friends of mine, new friends, I didn't meet these people until I started researching this area, had heard about the generic term electrosleep that was being used in the Soviet Union for addiction and alcohol control. The government gave these people a little money, sent them to the Soviet Union, and they came back with one of the original devices that was used for, quote, electrosleep. It seemed that the Soviets had trouble with generals who drank too much vodka. And at this hospital in Washington, which is a household word, they were treating American generals who had the habit of too much scotch, bourbon, or vodka, or gin. They brought the device back to the United States in late 1969, early 1970, began using it in the hospital with addicts. This is thoroughly documented. It's one of the most fascinating psychopolitical stories that emerged during the 5 months that I was actually researching this data. The CIA came around and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, we have this electronic device, which apparently is restoring brain function in Korsakoff psychosis, which means loss of short-term memory." CIA said, "You can't do that." The people who were working on the project were dispersed, took the device to Garland, Texas, to the Vero Instrument Company. Now, Vero builds the high-technology equipment like Hughes does, the Glomar Explorer. Vero builds skunkwork devices like starlight scopes, infrared viewers, high technology microcomputers. They're one of the highest tech government secret agency suppliers in the world. The vice president of this company split off, founded a corporation called Neurosystems Incorporated, which is in the telephone book in Garland, Texas, and brought out a beautiful little device, which until recently was the Cadillac of the entire field, about the size of a pack of cigarettes, that absolutely cured addiction. They thought, wow, we're going to have markets for this. They never got FDA approval. It's been 14 years. FDA grandfathered them under Section 510K and B of the 1976 Congressional Act. They still said, hey, if we take this around to dry farms, namely alcoholic rehabilitation centers, there should be a tremendous need for these. Now, in California alone, there are about 24, Raleigh Hills, Schick, Seidel, CompCare. It's a big industry. He knocked on doors, and there was very little acceptance. Until finally, a fellow who had worked for one of these dry farms told him the secret. He said, you know, if somebody comes in here who has good insurance, we can run up about a $9,000 bill on laboratory tests alone, pathology, kidney tests, blood tests, you name it. He has to be in here for at least a week and a half to 14 days before we break even on our television advertising budget alone. We know that 75% of our business comes from recidivism. The person who gets glossed up, the family's happy, he goes back to work, will be back there. 75% of them will backslide within 6 months. You come in here with a device that will totally restore them in 5 days. Why, we are a franchise. We are here to make money for our stockholders. Get out of here, you bum. Now, fortunately, this company had spent a great deal of money and absolutely totally documenting the effects of this little device. They found that it reversed Korsakoff's psychosis in 3 to 5 days with chronic alcoholics. This work was done at the University of Wisconsin Medical School, at the University of Louisiana Medical College, and at the University of Texas. Now, any of you who've dealt with alcoholism know that it normally takes 8 years for the short-term memory to be restored, 8 years of total abstinence. The short-term memory profile of an alcoholic absolutely pinpoints the amount of degeneration. One of the tests is the maze test, where you have to go through a maze without lifting the pencil from the paper. The other is the beta section of a test, where you have to look at words on one page. The page is taken away, and you have to remember it on subsequent pages. An alcoholic will usually show a profile of almost total inability to pass these two facets of this particular assay. In all of their subjects, I don't like to say all, it's rather spooky, 99% of them, they were able, where they had a baseline of tests, for example, when the person had been to college, had taken this same or a similar test, had become an alcoholic for 15 years, where they had access to the original records, the short-term memory was totally restored in 5 days of using this little box 40 minutes a day. Now, this is wild and wonderful. All of this emerged during some of the research. I spent quite a bit of time in the Biomed Library at UCLA, some time at the Norris Library, USC County, and some of the papers, particularly the work done in the Soviet Union and in the Orient, were only available at the National Medical Archives at Bethesda, Maryland. But I have compiled a bibliography. It isn't in the final form, and any of you who are health professionals can get a copy of it. I'm still trying to get it on the word processor, and there's an explosion of information in electromedicine lately, as anyone knows, and I try to update it, so every week my friends send me at least another dozen references on this particular topic. Now, it became apparent after spending a great deal of time with Meg that nothing was going to happen in this particular sector.